You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1262, OneNote, negative compound intervals versus negative compound modal distance. List of presentations, which we plan on adding plenty more to shortly. Also noting within this OneNote presentation, we'll spend all of our time on the music theory side of things, but we also have another similarly numbered and named presentation where we build these tables in Excel, practicing Excel music theory and just table visualization all at the same time. We're going to be continuing here talking about our intervals, which is going to be the measure of distance. However, this time we're going in the counterclockwise direction, and we're going to go past an octave in the negative or counterclockwise direction. And that's going to be an area where the normal scale degree system just completely falls apart. So we'd like to compare that to the modal distance system and also think about how we can use the current scale degree system to make it work as we go in a direction that it's not well designed to go in, but which we really need to be able to go in. Before we do that, let's just recap our analogy here because we want to make sure that we're not losing track of what we're trying to do. What are we trying to do? Navigate the fretboard. And how do we do that? We visualize it as a map of the territory, or the territory itself has 7 destination locations like the continents on a globe, has 5 non-destination locations like the oceans on the globe, which we go through to get to the continents. Our head above the globe, above the fretboard, is looking down on this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, and we're visualizing that the fretboard is rotating around like the planet is rotating around, assigning 12 degrees of locations like the 12 notes in the musical alphabet, typically working in the degree number 4, which we're going to call the collection of notes, the continents related to the degree of C major. We could go to C sharp, we could go to D, to E, and so on, and the whole thing would shift relative like the world spinning around. Therefore, once I have my degree of vision, I no longer want to name it by the note names, but rather by the equivalent of the continent names, which are like the Nashville number system numbers, if you're familiar with that, which is just another way to say the modes by number, 1 being Ionian, 4 being Lydian, 3 being Phrygian, 2 being Dorian, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem with that is that our naming convention tries to pull us out of that because of the scale degree nature of it, as we have discussed, and it has particular problems when we go in the negative direction. And that on the fretboard would mean when we're measuring from like this note going backwards, or when we're going up on the fretboard towards the ceiling, which is going down in pitch. You might notice that most of the time, most likely you, if you play the guitar, and most other people can't really tell their intervals when they're going backwards, when they're going towards the tail of the guitar or up towards the ceiling, right? We only know it going down or up in pitch. So that's what we'll work on now. As we do that, remember, if we're looking at this for Australia, there's 2 ways we could do the measurement. The measurement is very basic. There's 2 ways we can measure. If we have 7 notes, we can measure note by note, continent by continent. So I could say this 1, 2, this is 2 notes up, 2 continents up to get to this 6 up here. But they use the scale degrees, which is a mismeasurement in essence, making that the 1, 2, 3. So it's 2 continents up or 2 modal half steps up, which would be the 3rd scale degree. Or I can count the oceans as well. In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it would be 4 continents and oceans up, which would be equivalent to 4 notes up. Those are our 2 units of measure. But I could go backwards, meaning I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continents in the negative or counterclockwise direction. Now, this is where the scale degree falls apart, because if I make that the 1, then it kind of makes sense going forward to make that the 2, but it doesn't really make sense going backwards, because that would have to be -1. That's why we need to start at 0 when we're measuring things. So when we go backwards, the whole thing kind of falls apart. We already saw that in a prior presentation when we saw within an octave going in the negative or counterclockwise direction. Now we're going negative or counterclockwise, and I want to go more than a lap in the negative direction. So in other words, I'd like to say I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So a compound modal distance of 12. So there's two ways I can name that. I could, and I think the best way to do it would be to say I'm going to name the distance in notes that would be a compound distance, as though I went around the block 2 times or 1.5 times in the negative direction, but keep the local distance for the modal distance, meaning keep the local distance 1, 2, 3, 4. So if someone asked me directions, I'd still say it's counterclockwise 4 continents, but right, and that gives you the best of both worlds. However, you could, if you want to drop the note distance, then the only way you can add the added dimension, which I'm going to say is like time, the time it takes to go an added step around the block. That's what the octave can give us, making this pop off the map from just a circle to a 3D shape. Then we the only thing we have is a compound interval. So then we'd have to use the compound interval. We can't use a negative compound scale degree interval because we lost the intervals. So we have to, if we use our normal kind of conventional tools, we have to figure out some way to go negative. If we use the modal distance, then we have options on how we can go negative, because we could do a compound negative modal distance and it works fine because we measured properly. That's where we're at now. All right, so let's go on over here. Remember what we did is we took our notes. We have 12 notes in the musical alphabet. We're picking the ones 7 notes within the view, the degree of view for the key of C by applying the formula, which is going whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's going to give us our 7 notes. Notice if we can do that from any other key, then we get all relative positions. So all of our intervals are going to be basically the same. We have our 7 notes here. We talked about the 7 notes going up, meaning if I look at any point on the guitar, any note on the guitar, I can measure, just like a ruler, the distance from that point, which means there could be 11 distances away plus the 0 would give us 12. But that's only when I go clockwise. We could also go counterclockwise. Now we saw when we go counterclockwise, we run into a problem with the scale degrees. Why? Because we started the scale degree at 1. In other words, if I'm looking at this C and I measure going forward, I should be measuring from the C, making this the 1 modal half step away, 2, 3. But no, we make this the scale degree. If that's the 1, this is the 2. But what if I go backwards, counterclockwise around the block? Then this is going to have to be like -1, right? Because it would have to be -1 to make that the -2nd scale degree. So most people don't talk that way, which means we totally lose scale degrees going in the negative direction. So we saw that being a problem. We accommodated for that by adding the note distance. So I'm going to say we're going 1 note back in the negative direction, and then think about the forward direction. How many steps would I have to go around the block clockwise to get to that same point? I'd have to say 12 minus 1 would be 11, and 11 is a major 7. Therefore, the major 7 could be going back 1 or forward 11. So my solution to this problem using our conventional tools is to add the notes, which I would like to do anyways, because when I'm learning the guitar, I want to be able to say distance so that I make sure that I know what these terms actually mean. Otherwise, we're implying distance, but we're not actually saying it, and people learn by shape, particularly on the guitar, losing the idea of distance altogether. So what if I go forward? If I'm going forward past 11, so let's say I go 16 forward in the clockwise direction. Well, I would like to call that then a 16 note away major 3rd. That gives me the distance because I know that it's 16 is greater than 12. So in other words, 16 minus 12 would be a 4 note away major 3rd. So it's a 4 note away plus an octave, or 4 plus 12, or in other words, 16 note away major 3rd. The major 3rd still gives us the flavor. Most guitarists kind of learning all the intervals as though they were in the local distance within 12 degrees, and we learn by shape. But I'd like to give more detail to give the actual distance, and that gives me the flavor and it gives me the distance. But a lot of people will use what we call a compound, not a lot of people, but a lot of textbooks will use a compound interval, which means they're going to keep on counting the scale degrees after 7. So if I drop the notes, then you have to do that, right? Because all they're going to say is major 10. If they say it's a major third, then you got to assume that it's within a 12 note distance. But if they say it's a major 10, then you have to say, okay, 10 minus 7 would give us the third. And then you could figure out what the 10 means by saying the major third is going to be 4 notes away. Adding 12 to it will get you up there. So that's what the textbook typically does. It drops the notes. But as we saw, when we go in the negative direction, we can't really drop the notes because there's no negative scale degrees. The scale degrees fall apart when I go in the negative direction. And that, of course, is going to continue to be the case when I go in the negative direction past a octave. So let's take a look at 13 back. If I go 13 back, then I can't really do a negative compound interval, because when I went in the negative direction, we don't normally say, well, that now I'm going to make the negative 1, and this would be the negative 2, and then I can keep compounding it going backwards. So it totally kind of falls apart. So to me, the only way to really deal with the conventional tools so that we can add directionality is to add the notes. So to say the notes directionally negative in the negative direction. So that's what I would want to do that anyways, because I want to learn the negative direction. I want to be able to see directionality in my mind, not just scale shape. The shape is good. I'd like to see the shapes on the fretboard, but I'd also like to see directionality, how many steps forward, how many steps backwards, and how many modal half steps forwards and backwards. Now, I would think it would be better then if I go back down to our 16 major third to be measuring from a particular point, from the Ionian, from the Dorian, from one of the continents. Because remember, the major doesn't really give us any context other than it's in the major key. And when we say it's a major that's in like the Mixolydian key, it actually kind of messes us up thinking that we're in the major key when we're not, right? So what I'd like to say is name the node. I'd like to say it's a 16 note away from the Ionian node, and then still give the local distance possibly, which would be the second scale degree. Second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. But if we use this system and we want to drop the notes, we could call it an Ionian ninth modal half step, which would be the 10th scale degree. And that still works because the measurement system is actually more proper. And if I go in the negative direction,